Ralph came to the Rockefeller with the notion to work with Dr. Zanville Cohen on the question of what initiates immune response. So there's a primary immune response, which is an immune response to a new thing, and then there's a secondary or recall immune response. So one of the most important attributes of the immune system is memory. So the ability to induce a recall response or a secondary immune response was pretty well understood. It was understood that there were macrophages and B cells, both of which could present antigen and provoke that response or evoke that response. But what was actually starting immunity? What was initiating that primary immune response, primary immunity, was still unclear. And that was the question Ralph came here to address. That was the question that fascinated him. And the thinking was that it was this population of cells called macrophages, which are a phagocyte. They're very important. They're throughout the body. And Ralph began to work with them. You would put the cells in culture. You would stick them to glass. You would come back after an hour or two and wash off the non-adherent cells. And then you'd put them in culture overnight for the macrophages to really do their thing and stick to the glass. Well, if you looked carefully the next day, you would see that there was a second population of cells floating in the media. And that was what Ralph focused on. They looked different from macrophages. They were characterized by these long spinous processes, tree-like processes that came out, and they would float around, and with these processes they would envelope and touch all the other cells in the culture. And no doubt, many people had seen these cells, but they had just attributed them to being peculiar macrophages. But Ralph, because he questioned so much and because he observed so carefully, decided to interrogate these cells. And it was in this population of cells that he identified the dendritic cell. And it turned out that the dendritic cells were 1,000 times more potent at stimulating immunity than macrophages. And the reason that most people thought macrophages were the cells that did it were there were probably small populations of dendritic cells contaminating their macrophage cultures. So it was in this population of cells that Ralph identified the dendritic cells. There's a wonderful story about how they got their name. I didn't tell this before, but I'll tell this now. I meant to tell this. So Ralph's wife, Claudia, who got me my introduction to Ralph, was and is a very lovely and beautiful, long-armed and long-legged, slender lady. And Ralph, from the day I met him till the day he died, was madly in love with Claudia. He just adored her. I don't think he quite ever got over his good fortune of having made her fall in love with him. He really loved her. And she had these beautiful long arms and legs. So he described these cells and he came home and he told her he wanted to call them Claudiocytes. And Claudia explained to him that was not going to be a good idea, that he should, though it was very thoughtful of him and very sweet, that he should not name the cells after her and that he had to come up with a different name. So he thought about it and he, rather than choosing to name them for her, named them dendritic cells, the name which has stuck. But still, sometimes when I look at them and I see those tree-like processes, I think of her. And he would tell that story sometimes, and people would look at her at meetings, you know, kind of up and down to see her arms and legs. But he worked on these cells, and people really didn't believe him. People thought he was chasing an artifact for a long time. People very kindly came up to me in the lab and took me aside and said, you know, you should probably be doing something else. This is probably not a good plan for you. And I sometimes reflect on why I didn't question him more. And I think part of the reason I didn't question him more was I was very young. I had no dogma in my head. I didn't have anything to unlearn. And he was a very good teacher, and he showed the data so elegantly and so clearly, and frankly, so charismatically, that it was hard not to sort of see it his way. But I do think that really what made him special was his ability to see before him what was there and not what he thought he should see.